In today's video, we're going to go through some of the common things that could cause this machine simply not to start or run at all. There's about 6 or 7 different things that we want to do, a few common parts that could go wrong, and figure out exactly how to define if they are in fact wrong. So let's get into the machine. I want to show you some tricks to figure this out and then how to replace some of the parts as well. And if you do find a part that needs replaced in this, I will have links in the description for the parts that this kind of GE washing machine uses. It's a newer style, so I hope that you can support the channel by considering purchasing them. But let's go ahead and get to some of the secrets of this machine and see what we can find out.
Possibly the first most basic thing, turn the dial. Does the machine make a noise? In some instances, the inside of the dial could be cracked or damaged, and it won't let you select a valid mode. Also, make sure to press the start button and make sure that the unit makes a clicking sound. Next, let's try a super fast check on the lid top. Make sure it's not bubbled in or out, which could cause the striker not to go in far enough to the lid lock that would prevent the unit from working. Make sure the lid where the striker is seated into the lock is flat against the lid like you would see here. Another quick check that you want to make is at the back of the machine where the water valves are. If the water supply hoses are not providing water to the valves, or the valves themselves at the mesh filters are clogged, jam-packed with debris, then the washing machine will not turn on and work, and you'd want to either clean or replace the valves. Next, instead of testing every single component on this washing machine, let's try to see if we can find the hidden tech manual underneath. Make sure you have the washing machine in a safe area and tilt it back or to the side to look underneath it. On the side or behind, you should find a hidden technician's manual with hidden codes. It could be in a plastic pouch, but it should be somewhere around here. If you cannot find it, I will have a link in the description to a manual for one of the older machines that you can use for reference. The schematics will give you a lot of information. And if you have a newer machine, what we really want to look for are the lights that show up when there's an error code and how to get to them, just in case your machine's slightly different than mine. To quickly find the error codes, press and hold the start button for 10 seconds and then release it. If a set of lights blink along with the pause and lid locked buttons, then you are seeing the codes that may be making the machine not start. If you press the start/pause button again, it will cycle through all the potential codes that the machine has. If you press the start and pause button and all the lights turn on and then off, all the codes have been displayed. And if you press the start/pause button again, it will return you to the first code and cycle through them again. On the tech sheet, you can look at the lights and see what they mean, but in case you couldn't find a sheet or find it in the description, here is a quick list of lights that could be present and what they would do. On the next few sets of images, here are what the lights would look like that you could see on this interface, along with what's happening, and this may help you guide to what is wrong. We're going to go slowly through this list, and once done, we're going to go over a few different parts and how to test them or change them or identify what could be wrong in the chain of problems. We'll also go through a few problems that may not have error codes related to them as well. Once you're done with the error codes, moving the dial in any direction will end the error code mode and return you to the main screen. One issue though is that some of the codes that you get on this screen could be wrong or old, and it would be good to clear and delete the codes first. Here's the ultimate move for this style washing machine, the field service mode entry. It lets you force the unit to work on a part unless it is totally defective. To start, press and hold the start button with the machine plugged in, and then rotate the dial 7 increments. Then release the start/pause button. If you do this right, you'll hear the unit click and the lights will flash. Then you can select a ton of super useful parts to try, like the error code list that we saw earlier. Now from the first position, if you rotate the dial counterclockwise 4 clicks, you will see just the sensing fill light on. If you press and hold the start/pause button for 3 seconds, it's going to delete any error code that you had seen on the machine previously. This means that if you try to run the machine again and it does not start, whatever error code you find is basically the culprit of why the unit is not running. These codes that are exact should pop up, and you should be able to quickly diagnose what is wrong with your machine. Also, in that field service mode, you could turn the dial counterclockwise 1, 2, or 3 more times past the error code deletion to get to the agitate, spin, or lid lock modes. Here's a picture of the 4 modes in order with the lights that you should see on the screen and what each of those modes will do, and this will help you force the machine and test to confirm what is wrong. None of these work, then chances are that's what's wrong. In most cases with this style GE washing machine, though, the lid switch is bad, and I want to show you how to access it in a few other parts of the system right now. Before you take anything apart, make sure to unplug the machine and move it to where you can access the rear. To start with, let's take a 1/4-inch screwdriver and remove the 2 screws located on each side of the back plate. Some models could have additional screws in the back metal cover on the back of the plate, but once you have all the screws removed, you'll need to slide the metal housing to the right and then away, exposing the back of the console entirely. Next, there is either a cardboard or plastic flap, which once removed will expose the board, and also from here you can see the gray pressure hose that's attached to the PCB. It could be kinked, damaged, or disconnected, and this would be a quick reason why the unit may not have started. To access the console though, unplug the pressure hose first, and then press it backwards towards the rear of the machine, and you could have to tap hard on it, then pull up and outwards, letting you rotate it. With the console dislodged, roll the console forward if you want to take the top of the washing machine off. The next step then would be to remove the 2 gray screws, one on each side, but you'll either need to move or take out the metal capacitor on the right side as well. In this case, let's go ahead and remove the capacitor and note the orientation of the wires on the left and right side, as well as the writing to the capacitor is face down, pointing towards the chassis of the machine. You can inspect the wire harness now that goes into the lid lock from the board. It goes into the chassis, and then there's the possibility that the wire harness has come unplugged from the board. Make sure that the connection is secure. Also at this stage, you could check, remove, or replace the water valves if they were leaking into the tub, cracked, or otherwise blocked with debris. I do have a fully dedicated video on how to access the valves to remove them, which will be later in the description if that was in case the problem. But let's get back to the chassis. At any rate, remove the 2 screws that are 1/4-inch hex head, one on each side of the rear of the machine, and note that these gray screws are very, very long. Now, in order to take the lid up from the front, snap the console back into place, roll it downward, and tap it in to lock it in place. On the front of the washing machine, there are 2 hidden tabs that hold the front in place. Both of these are offset from the center of the unit. To open them up, take a putty knife and press in, and then push down on your knife to roll the putty knife into the spring. This will unclip the lid slightly, and you'll need to do this and press in on both clips. Once both clips are depressed, you can roll the top up and move the lid as well, letting you access the lid switch. You can now then unplug the wire harness from the lid switch, or in some cases, maybe the connector was just disconnected from the lid lock that you can plug back in place to fix it. Fun fact, this is identical to a Whirlpool washing machine's lid switch on new units. The system is identical. If you want to remove the lid lock, you need to first take out the white bezel that snaps into the lid lock. You can use your thumbs and press the white tabs away to the outside, then press on the door lock bezel to remove it. Next, on the top, use a small screwdriver and gently press in on this tab on the top side of the lid switch. Once you have it pressed in, you can slide the lock to the left and then fully remove it. One note that is an issue on the GE washing machines not starting is that if you find out that the lock was bad, you do want to remove the striker and replace it as well. And it's just these 2 screws here on the striker. If you need either of these parts, the lock or the striker, I will have a link in the description and a product tag on YouTube Shopping if you'd like to support the channel. The striker can only be reinserted one way into the lid itself for reference. On the lid lock, you'll need to reinstall it in the opposite order. Push the unit in and then slide it to the right and then to the left. Once locked in place, the bezel will go back into the top of the lid. This will only go in one way, as there's a small guiding peg on the bezel to make sure that you get it installed correctly. Make sure also to reinstall the harness wire into the door lock assembly. Once you have the door lock back in place, the lid will basically slide down and fit and lock slightly back into place. You will need to press down on the tabs in the front to make sure that the front of the washing machine does lock into place though. Now, some models of GE lid locks will have included the harness assembly, so at the rear of the machine, if you replace the lock plus the harness, just make sure it is installed correctly. From here, you can reinstall the 2 screws to the chassis, then reinstall the capacitor to its housing, and at least on this unit, the label side was down. Make sure to install the wires to the capacitor, and then you can slide the back metal plate into place and reinstall the 2 screws that hold the plate into place in the console. And we're essentially done with things involving the lid lock, board connections, and pressure hose. Now let's go ahead and get to the underneath side of the washing machine and check for a few more issues. You'll need to have the washing machine placed in a way where you can lay it almost nearly on its back, but make sure to watch out for the drain hose, as you don't want to have it lower than the bottom of the machine, or else any water that's left in the unit will drain out in the hose on the floor. So place a box behind the unit to keep it slightly elevated. Make sure to pay attention to the lid moving as well as we tip the machine over. You could use some tape to secure it in place, but I have the drain hose in it, so it won't work too well. Underneath the machine, do you see any initial issues or damage possible? The plastic cover is a common culprit of issues, but to remove it to look inside, you'll need a 3/8 socket wrench or screwdriver. There are 3 screws that need removed. Note that one of these screws may have a grounding strap on it, so make note of it during the reinstallation later. With the cover off, inspect the cover first for damage. You could note things like oil, rubber belt shavings on it, and other such blockages. Next, check the belt and pulley system for issues. Oftentimes on these GE washing machines, the belt could be damaged or shaved or have an obstruction in it, or it could have oil and grease on it, which would prevent the system from running properly. Also, make sure to check all the wire harnesses when you're down here looking at various components. Now, to remove the belt, if it is still attached, roll the belt on the 2 pulleys clockwise or counterclockwise while pulling the belt downward away from the chassis to dislodge the belt. When you have the belt off, make sure to check the grooves of the belt for oil or other debris. It's very common for oil or grease to get on the belt, which would cause it to slip, which would allow the unit not to start and run properly. With the belt off, check both of the pulleys. Next, check both pulleys for side-to-side movement as well as forward and back movement. Are they extremely snug, or do they have a lot of rotation in them to where they can freely move to the side or up and down into the gear case? In the situation of the right side pulley, there could be some damage on it on the underneath side where the clutch is, and we'll get to that in just a moment. If your belt was frayed or damaged though, one thing to definitely check on this type of machine is inspecting the speed sensor on the left side where the motor is. Now, if you want to remove either of these pulleys, you have to take the nut off, which is a 9/16 or 15mm socket wrench. It will unscrew counterclockwise, and they're not too hard to get off. But once you have the nut off, it's very difficult to pull either of these black pulleys off. In the case of this machine, I used a large flat-bladed screwdriver to press in on the pulley and gently pry it off. You may want to also check the underside of this pulley for other damage or obstruction once you have it off though. Next, I would inspect the speed sensor for damage. If again the belt was damaged, it's very possible that a shred of the belt could have damaged or displaced the speed sensor. And if you need to remove the speed sensor, simply take a smaller flat-bladed screwdriver and then press in on each side of the tabs near the motor housing while putting pressure on the harness to pull it away and dislodge it. Once you have both of these clips gone and the sensor dislodged, you need to unplug the harness by moving the small red tab and then unplug the harness, and I don't think my camera caught this when I was doing it. If you need one of these speed sensors, I do have a link for them in the description. To get it installed, you're simply going to slide it back onto the motor housing, and this does take a little bit of maneuvering. There's 2 small tabs on the underneath side of the speed sensor that need inserted behind the motor, and then slide the sensor on and then it will clip and lock back into place. From there, you can just simply plug the wire harness, and don't forget that small red tab to lock it down. Sometimes the white cable tie could get unhooked and you may need to lock it back into place, because that did happen when I removed and replaced the speed sensor on this. To put the pulley back on, simply line the splines on the motor casing up, press it into the shaft, and then screw the nut back on with your 9/16 or 15mm socket wrench. Make sure it's on quite tight. The last thing I want to show you on this video though is the shifter, pulley, and clutch assembly system. To remove it, you need to do the same thing as the motor pulley by using the same socket wrench to unscrew the nut in the same way. However, once the nut is off, this pulley is much more difficult to remove. You can use a heavy metal object to tap the black pulley on the back side and slowly rotate it while tapping it to remove it. Or in my case, I had a motor puller like what I have here, and I was able to gently remove this pulley. Either system will work, but for camera purposes, I decided to use the puller because it took a whole lot less time to use. Once you have this black pulley off, you can inspect the clutch, shifter, and wiring for any sort of damage. Also the underside of the pulley that could have been either obstructed or damaged. Next, if you wanted to unplug the shifter, you do need to unplug the harness first, and we're going to take it off just real quick to show you. You'll use a 3/8 socket wrench like what we used to take off the belt cover, but be careful because this entire assembly is connected. Once you remove the second screw that holds the shifter assembly in place, the spring will want to jump at you like a xenomorph from Aliens, so be very careful and have your hand on the assembly to remove the entire system. From here you can inspect the shifter, the clutch, and the clutch spring. I will have a link to the shifter in the description feed if you found out that there was a code that required you to replace it. Now, if you wanted to test the clutch resistance electronically with a multimeter, just quickly the schematic will show you what the resistance of the motor is. In the case of this one, it's 5,700 ohms. You would set your multimeter to ohms and then use the two leads of the multimeter to test the wire connections. One pair will give you a reading of 0.01 ohms, and the other pair should give you what's on the schematic. On this particular model, we had 5,200 ohms, which was just barely in spec, so I probably should go ahead and replace this one. When you have to put the clutch and shift assembly back in place, you need to install the clutch spring first, and then the plastic clutch second. The white clutch has a small lip that the spring will nestle into, then the clutch will go into place. This can be kind of difficult having to hold the clutch and the shifter into place, and it's a little bit difficult with a socket wrench. You may want to use a drill instead. Once you have that in place though, make sure that the wire harness is plugged back into the shifter too. To put the pulley back on, simply press it back into place in alignment with the splines of the clutch. Make sure that the side that has ridges match the clutch and press it in slightly. Take your 15mm or 9/16 socket and tighten it as good as you can. It will need to go on quite tight. Finally, to put the belt back on, thread it onto the motor pulley, then press it on the transmission pulley as well. Rotate the transmission pulley clockwise or counterclockwise while holding the belt in place. This will force the belt to stretch onto the pulley rather easy. But if you did have to buy a replacement belt, some of them are very stiff and difficult to get installed, and you could warm it up slightly with a hairdryer first to make it a little bit easier to put onto the pulley assembly. Next, to reinstall the belt cover, you'll attach the 3 screws with a 3/8 socket wrench. Now, on the bottom screw, at least from my angle on this unit, I had to reinstall that grounding strap we talked about earlier, which was a little bit difficult to get on camera, but you do get the idea. Now, these are all the common things that would cause your GE washing machine not to start, but it's not an exhaustive list. I do have other videos coming out on this GE washing machine. At this point, it should show on the screen for YouTube, and I will have the links to the other videos in the description as well. We'll talk more about the spin assembly, the drain assembly, and a few other pieces that could cause some other issues with this machine. And if you need more information on the machine, just make sure to watch those videos. And again, if you need the parts that were involved in this, I will have the links. But I hope you have a great day and this video helped you